The smoke still rose from the battlefield when Dr. Elena Vasquez pulled her medical bag from the overturned transport. Around her, the remains of what had been the largest interspecies military base in the galaxy lay in ruins. 3 days of fighting had ended with the sudden retreat of the hegemony forces, leaving behind a graveyard of twisted metal, scorched earth, and the wounded from a dozen different worlds. Elena's hands shook as she checked her supplies. Plasma burns, radiation sickness, and conventional wounds from energy weapons. She had treated them all during the siege. But now, in the eerie quiet that followed the alien retreat, she found herself alone among the wreckage with only her oath as a doctor to guide her. The human evacuation ships had departed 6 hours ago. Command had given the all-clear to abandon the base after confirming the hegemony fleet had jumped to hyperspace. Most personnel had been eager to leave this hellish place behind. Elena should have been on one of those ships, heading back to Earth for debriefing and well-deserved rest. Instead, she walked through the debris field, following the weak biosignatures on her medical scanner. The device, designed to detect life signs across multiple species, showed scattered readings throughout the complex. Some were too weak to save. Others belonged to hegemony soldiers who would likely shoot her on sight if conscious. But she had to check. She had to try. The first survivor she found was a Centauri communications officer trapped beneath a collapsed beam. Elena worked for 40 minutes to extract the blue-skinned humanoid, treating crush injuries and internal bleeding before activating an emergency beacon. The automated rescue drones would find him within hours. The second was a human engineer, badly burned but conscious. Elena stabilized him and moved him to the designated pickup zone where the drones would prioritize human casualties. He tried to convince her to leave with him, to wait for official rescue teams. But Elena knew that by the time those teams arrived, any remaining survivors would be dead. As she moved deeper into the base, her scanner picked up something unusual. The biosignature was massive, larger than any species she had encountered during her 3 years of interspecies medical training. The readings were faint but steady, indicating a creature in critical condition but still fighting to survive. Following the signal led her to what had been the base's central command structure. The massive dome, once a symbol of cooperation between the allied species coalition, now stood partially collapsed. Debris from the battle had punched holes in the reinforced walls, and emergency lighting cast strange shadows across the wreckage. Elena climbed through a gap in the outer wall, her scanner guiding her toward the source of the life signs. The path took her down into the lower levels, past abandoned command stations, and through corridors filled with smoke and the acrid smell of burned electronics. She found the creature in what had been a storage bay for heavy equipment. At first, Elena thought she was looking at a piece of damaged machinery. The form was enormous, nearly 30 feet long, and covered in what appeared to be metallic scales that reflected the emergency lighting. But as she approached, she realized the truth that made her breath catch in her throat. It was a dragon. Elena had heard stories, of course. Every human had. Dragons were among the oldest known sentient species in the galaxy, with technology and civilization dating back millions of years. They were also among the rarest. Only a few dozen were known to exist, scattered across the outer rim worlds where they served as advisors, scholars, and occasionally as military commanders for species they deemed worthy. This one had been serving with the coalition forces. The dragon lay on its side, breathing slowly and irregularly. One of its wings was completely destroyed, the membrane burned away, leaving only the skeletal framework. Deep gashes across its flanks oozed a golden fluid that Elena recognized as dragon blood from her xenobiology studies. Most serious was a massive plasma burn across the creature's chest, where the scales had been melted and fused into an ugly mass of scar tissue. Elena's medical scanner went wild as she approached. The readings were unlike anything in her experience. Multiple hearts, redundant organ systems, a nervous system that seemed to extend throughout the entire body. The creature's internal temperature was dropping rapidly, and its breathing was becoming more labored with each passing minute. According to her database, dragons had never been successfully treated by non-dragon medics. Their physiology was too complex, too alien. Even their blood chemistry was based on elements that were toxic to most other species. Standard medical procedures could be more harmful than helpful. The rational decision would be to move on, to find survivors she could actually save. Elena stood there for a long moment, watching the rise and fall of the massive chest, listening to the labored breathing that echoed through the chamber. Every principle of battlefield medicine told her to prioritize patients she could help. But she also remembered the day she had taken her oath as a doctor. The promise to do no harm, to preserve life wherever possible, to treat all patients regardless of species, politics, or personal belief. She had meant those words when she spoke them, even when they applied to enemy soldiers. Elena opened her medical bag and began unpacking supplies. The first challenge was simply understanding what she was dealing with. Her scanner provided basic vital signs, but dragon physiology was so far outside normal parameters that she had to recalibrate the device 3 times just to get consistent readings. The creature had 4 hearts working in sequence, each responsible for circulating blood to different organ systems. Its lungs operated on a 4-stage cycle unlike anything she had studied. Working by emergency lighting and the glow of her scanner, Elena began with the most obvious problem, the massive plasma burn. The wound was infected with some kind of energy residue that was preventing natural healing. Dragon scales were supposed to be nearly indestructible, but the high-powered plasma cannon that had caused this damage had been designed specifically for penetrating heavy armor. Elena used her laser scalpel to carefully remove the damaged tissue, working by instinct and improvisation. Dragon anatomy was different from anything in her training, but trauma medicine followed certain universal principles. Stop the bleeding, prevent infection, restore function where possible. The golden blood proved to be even more challenging than she had expected. It clotted differently than human blood, forming crystalline structures rather than soft scabs. When she applied standard coagulants, the blood began to harden into something resembling metal, which would have trapped damaged tissue and prevented healing. Elena had to work quickly to remove the coagulants and find an alternative approach. Hours passed as she worked. The dragon remained unconscious throughout her ministrations, its breathing growing steadier as she cleared away damaged tissue and applied synthetic healing compounds. Elena's back ached from bending over the massive form, and her hands cramped from the precision work required to navigate around scales and alien bone structures. It was during her work on the wing that she made her first real breakthrough. The membrane connecting the wing bones was completely destroyed, but the underlying framework was intact. As Elena cleaned the wounds, she noticed something remarkable. Tiny filaments of what looked like nerve tissue were already beginning to regenerate, growing outward from the main wing structure. Dragons could regrow damaged tissue. This changed everything. Instead of trying to repair the damage, Elena focused on creating optimal conditions for the creature's natural healing abilities. She cleaned away dead tissue, applied synthetic nutrients to support regrowth, and used her medical laser to stimulate cellular activity in the damaged areas. The work was exhausting and mentally draining. Elena had been awake for nearly 18 hours when she finally completed her initial treatment of the major wounds. The dragon's breathing was stronger now, and its internal temperature had stabilized. The medical scanner showed significant improvement in brain activity and circulation. Elena sat back against a piece of debris and allowed herself a moment of rest. Around her, the emergency lights continued their slow fade as the base's backup power systems gradually failed. Soon she would be working in complete darkness. She checked her communications device for the 5th time in an hour. Still no signal. The battle had damaged the base's communication array, and her portable unit didn't have enough range to reach the nearest coalition outpost. The automated rescue drone she had summoned for the other survivors would eventually search this area, but not for several more hours. The dragon stirred slightly, one massive eyelid fluttering open to reveal an eye like a golden jewel. For a moment, Elena thought the creature might be regaining consciousness. But the eye closed again, and the dragon settled back into its healing sleep. Elena pulled out her emergency rations and forced herself to eat. She would need energy for the long night ahead. According to her scanner, the dragon was stable for now, but its condition could change rapidly. Dragon physiology was adapted for extreme environments and traumatic injuries, but this creature had been pushed beyond even those considerable limits. As she ate, Elena tried to process what she was doing. She was a human combat medic treating the most alien patient she had ever encountered, using improvised techniques in a ruined base on a world she couldn't even pronounce. If she succeeded, she would be the first non-dragon to successfully perform major medical treatment on one of the ancient creatures. If she failed, she would be alone in the dark with a dying being whose species was older than human civilization. The practical part of her mind cataloged the risks. Dragons were known to be proud and territorial. This one might not appreciate waking up in debt to a human medic. There were also stories, probably myths, about dragons who repaid debts in unexpected ways. Some of those stories ended well for the humans involved. Others did not. But Elena pushed those concerns aside. She was a doctor first and a human second. The creature in front of her was injured and needed help. Everything else was secondary. She returned to work as the last emergency lights finally died, leaving her with only the glow of her medical scanner and the small work light attached to her surgical kit. In the artificial twilight of the ruined base, Elena continued her vigil over the sleeping dragon, monitoring its vital signs and adjusting her treatments as the creature's powerful healing abilities slowly began to repair the damage. Outside, the alien sun set over a battlefield littered with the debris of a dozen civilizations. Inside the collapsed command center, a human medic worked through the night to save a creature from the dawn of galactic history. Elena had no way of knowing that her decision to stay would set in motion events that would reshape the relationship between humans and dragons for generations to come. The dragon's breathing grew steadier as the hours passed. Its massive hearts settled into a synchronized rhythm that Elena's scanner registered as optimal for healing sleep. The regeneration of damaged tissue was proceeding faster than she had dared to hope, though the process was unlike anything in her medical training. Elena documented everything she could, recording scanner readings and making detailed notes about the creature's physiology. If she survived this experience, her data would be invaluable for future xenobiological research. More importantly, it might save the life of the next dragon injured in humanity's war against the hegemony. As the alien dawn began to filter through the cracks in the damaged structure, Elena allowed herself to hope that both she and her patient might see another day. The dragon was stable, its healing process well underway. Her own supplies were holding out, though she would need to be creative about continuing treatment with limited resources. The real test would come when the dragon woke up. Elena settled in to wait, maintaining her vigil over the sleeping giant as the sounds of the waking world began to filter in from outside. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear the approach of rescue vehicles. The coalition had not forgotten about the survivors on this battlefield. But Elena remained with her patient, committed to seeing her unprecedented medical intervention through to its conclusion. She had crossed a line the night before. From treating familiar species with known physiologies to pioneering an entirely new field of interspecies medicine. There was no going back now. The dragon's eye opened again, this time focusing directly on Elena's face. For a long moment, creature and doctor regarded each other in silence. Then the eye closed again, and the dragon settled back in a healing sleep. Elena smiled for the first time since the battle had ended. Her patient was going to live. The hardest part of her work was just beginning. Elena woke to the sound of massive breathing and the sensation of being watched. The emergency lighting had failed completely during the night, leaving the collapsed command center in darkness, broken only by the soft glow of her medical scanner. As consciousness returned, she realized she had fallen asleep sitting against a piece of debris, her hand still resting on the monitoring device attached to her patient. The dragon was awake. Two enormous golden eyes regarded her with an intelligence that made Elena's breath catch. Each eye was larger than her head, with pupils that contracted and dilated independently as the creature studied her. There was no hostility in that ancient gaze, but there was caution, curiosity, and something else that Elena couldn't identify. Elena remained perfectly still, unsure of the protocol for awakening next to a conscious dragon. Her medical training had covered first contact procedures for dozens of species, but dragons had never been included in those scenarios. They were too rare, too removed from normal diplomatic and military interactions. The dragon shifted slightly, testing its injuries. Elena watched as the massive head turned to examine the treated wounds across its flanks, then carefully stretched the damaged wing. The regeneration process had continued throughout the night, and what had been charred bone and destroyed membrane now showed the beginnings of new growth. When the dragon spoke, its voice was like distant thunder contained within the confines of the ruined chamber. The words came in perfectly accented human standard, though with harmonics that suggested the creature's vocal apparatus was far more complex than anything terrestrial. "You remained," the dragon said. It was not a question, but an observation delivered with a weight of considerable thought behind it. Elena cleared her throat, suddenly aware of how small and fragile she must appear to this ancient being. "You were injured. I'm a doctor. I couldn't leave." The dragon's head tilted slightly, a gesture that seemed almost bird-like despite the creature's massive size. "The others of your species departed. The battlefield has been abandoned. Yet you chose to stay with a being you do not know, to treat wounds you were not trained to heal." Elena slowly reached for her medical scanner, moving deliberately so the dragon could see her intentions. "May I check your vital signs? I need to monitor your recovery." The dragon considered this request with the gravity of a judge weighing testimony. After a long moment, it lowered its great head slightly in what Elena interpreted as consent. She activated her scanner and watched the readings scroll across the display. Heart rate stable, brain activity normal, regeneration proceeding within acceptable parameters for an unknown physiology. "You are called Elena Vasquez," the dragon said while she worked. "Combat medic, 3rd Interspecies Medical Corps, graduate of the Terra Nova Medical Academy. 3 years of xenobiological training, specialization in trauma surgery for non-human species." Elena paused in her work, looking up at the massive creature. "How do you know that?" "I accessed the base personnel files before the communication array was destroyed. While I detected your continued presence, I researched your background." The dragon's voice carried a note of what might have been amusement. It seemed prudent to understand who was treating my injuries. Elena returned to her scanner readings, processing this information. Dragons were known to have advanced technology, but she hadn't realized they could interface directly with electronic systems. The implications were staggering, but she pushed such thoughts aside to focus on her patient's condition. "Your regeneration is proceeding faster than I expected," she reported. "The plasma burns are healing cleanly, and I can see new growth in your wing membrane. How do you feel?" The dragon was quiet for a long moment, and Elena wondered if she had overstepped some cultural boundary. When the creature finally responded, its voice was thoughtful. "I feel surprised. My species has not accepted medical treatment from outsiders in over 10,000 years. We have our own healers, our own methods. Yet here I find myself recovering under the care of a human who improvised treatments for a physiology she had never encountered." Elena carefully detached her scanner and moved to examine the wing damage more closely. The regeneration was indeed remarkable. New membrane was growing from the bone structure, thin and translucent but clearly functional. Within days, possibly weeks, the wing would be fully restored. Your people have healers? Elena asked as she documented the healing progress. I'd love to learn from them. The regenerative capabilities of your species could revolutionize medical treatment across the galaxy. The dragon's laugh was like controlled thunder, deep and resonant, spoken like a true healer. Most beings who encounter my kind want to learn about our technology, our weapons, our knowledge of ancient civilizations. You ask about medicine. Elena looked up from her work to meet those massive golden eyes. Every species has something to teach about preserving life. Dragons have survived for millions of years. Your medical knowledge must be extraordinary. Indeed, the dragon agreed, though perhaps not in the way you might expect. We heal through will as much as treatment. Regeneration is a mental discipline as well as a physical process. Your treatments last night succeeded not just because of your skill, but because you provided something equally important. Elena waited for elaboration, but the dragon seemed content to leave the statement mysterious. She returned to her work, checking the plasma burn sites and applying fresh synthetic nutrients to support the healing process. Her supplies were running low, but she estimated she had enough for another day or two of treatment. The sound of aircraft engines in the distance interrupted her concentration. Elena looked toward the damaged ceiling where morning light was beginning to filter through the debris. The rescue teams had finally arrived to search for survivors. You should signal them, the dragon said quietly. Your people will be concerned for your safety. Elena hesitated, her hand moving toward her emergency beacon. Something in the dragon's tone suggested this was more than casual advice. What about you? Do you need evacuation? Medical support? The dragon's massive head shook slowly from side to side. My presence here complicates matters. Dragons do not typically serve in frontline combat roles. My participation in this battle was unofficial. There are political considerations that make my rescue problematic for both our species. Elena stared at the creature, trying to parse the implications. You're saying you shouldn't have been here? That treating you might cause diplomatic problems? I am saying that a dragon indebted to a human healer represents a significant shift in the relationship between our species. Such debts are not taken lightly by my kind. The aircraft sound were growing closer. Elena could hear the distinctive whine of coalition medical evacuation vehicles. Soon they would begin systematic sweeps of the base, looking for survivors. They would find her eventually, but she still had time to make a choice. Elena looked at her patient, then at her nearly depleted medical supplies. The dragon was stable, but not fully healed. Leaving now would mean abandoning her work before its completion. But staying might mean missing her only chance for evacuation, stranding her on a battlefield that could become active again without warning. The decision was made easier when Elena noticed new readings on her scanner. The dragon's healing had accelerated during their conversation, but now she detected signs of systemic stress. The rapid regeneration was taxing other organ systems, and the creature's energy reserves were running dangerously low. Your healing is putting strain on your metabolism, Elena announced. You need nutrients, energy supplements. My supplies aren't designed for your physiology, but I might be able to adapt them. Elena began rummaging through her medical kit, looking for anything that might help support a dragon's healing process. The biochemistry was completely unknown, but she could work from general principles. Complex organisms needed protein, carbohydrates, essential minerals, and energy substrates to fuel regeneration. The dragon watched her work with what seemed like fascination. You intend to remain, it observed. Elena looked up from her improvised chemistry. You're not stable yet. The healing process is accelerating, but it's also draining your reserves faster than expected. I can't leave a patient in critical condition, even though your own people are searching for you, even though remaining might cost you your career, your safety, your future. Elena paused in her work, considering the question seriously. She thought about her life back on Earth, her position with the interspecies medical corps, her plans for the future. All of that seemed very far away compared to the immediate reality of a wounded creature that needed her help. I took an oath, she said finally. To preserve life regardless of species, politics, or personal cost. I meant it when I said those words. The dragon was quiet for a long time, its golden eyes never leaving Elena's face. When it finally spoke, its voice carried a weight that suggested centuries of experience. Few beings in this galaxy understand the true meaning of honor. Fewer still are willing to sacrifice for principles when no one is watching. You remind me why my species chose to ally with yours against the hegemony. Elena returned to her work, mixing nutrients and energy supplements in proportions she hoped would be compatible with dragon physiology. The approaching aircraft were closer now, their search patterns systematic and thorough. She estimated she had perhaps an hour before they reached this section of the base. As she worked, the dragon began to speak about its species, sharing information that Elena realized was probably classified at the highest levels of Coalition command. Dragons were not just advisors and scholars. They were guardians, watchers who had guided younger species for millions of years. Their technology was based on principles that human science was only beginning to understand. More importantly, the dragon explained that its presence in the battle had been a test. The hegemony possessed weapons specifically designed to kill dragons, stolen technology from a war fought before humans had developed agriculture. The Coalition needed to know if those weapons were effective, and testing required a volunteer. Elena stopped her work, staring at the massive creature. You volunteered to be shot with weapons designed to kill dragons? Why? Because my species has remained hidden for too long. We have advised and guided from the shadows while younger races fought and died against enemies we helped create through our own ancient mistakes. The hegemony was our responsibility. It was time we took an active role in stopping them. Elena processed this revelation while applying the adapted nutrient mixture to the dragon's wounds. The implications were staggering. Dragons weren't just allies in humanity's war against the hegemony. They were co-belligerents fighting to correct their own historical errors. The nutrient mixture proved effective almost immediately. Elena's scanner showed improved energy distribution throughout the dragon's body, and the healing process accelerated without the dangerous metabolic stress she had detected earlier. The creature's breathing became deeper and more regular, and its massive muscles relaxed as the pain from its injuries diminished. Your improvised treatment is remarkably effective, the dragon observed. Perhaps more effective than some of our own healing methods. There is wisdom in approaching problems from outside traditional frameworks. Elena allowed herself a moment of professional satisfaction before returning to her monitoring routine. The dragon was definitely improving, but she wanted to observe the healing process for several more hours to ensure stability. The search aircraft were very close now. Elena could hear voices calling to each other across the ruins, the systematic progression of a professional rescue operation. Soon they would find her hiding place in the collapsed command center. The dragon seemed to sense her internal conflict. You could signal them now, it suggested gently. My condition is stable. Your work here is essentially complete. Elena looked at her patient, then at her scanner readings, then back at the dragon's ancient, intelligent eyes. The membrane regeneration is only about 60% complete. Your energy levels are still below optimal, and I want to observe your healing process for at least another day to document the techniques that worked. You wish to stay for scientific reasons, the dragon said with obvious amusement. Elena smiled, realizing how transparent her motivations had become. Partly, but mostly because you're still my patient, and I don't abandon my patients. The dragon's massive head moved closer to Elena, stopping just a few feet away. At this distance, she could see the intricate patterns in its golden scales, the subtle variations in color that created a kind of natural art across its hide. The creature's breath was warm and carried a scent like heated metal and exotic spices. Elena Vasquez, the dragon, said formally, I am Threnor Goldwing, eldest son of the Sanctuary September, guardian of the Outer Rim, and keeper of the Third Archive. You have honored me with your skill and dedication. I am in your debt. Elena felt the weight of ceremony in those words, though she didn't fully understand their significance. I was just doing my job, Threnor. Any doctor would have done the same. No, Threnor replied with absolute certainty. They would not have. And my name, when spoken by humans, is simply Thrin. We reserve formal names for formal occasions. Elena nodded, filing away this small piece of cultural information along with everything else she was learning. Thrin, then, how long do you think it will take for your wing to fully regenerate? At current rates of healing, perhaps 3 more days. Less if I enter deep meditation to focus my regenerative abilities. But such meditation would leave me vulnerable if the hegemony returns. Elena checked her communications device again, still finding no signal. The rescue teams would establish communication relays as they worked, but for now she remained cut off from Coalition Command. She had no way of knowing if the hegemony retreat was permanent or merely tactical. Is there a safe place nearby where you could complete your healing? Elena asked. Somewhere with better defensive positions and access to supplies? Thren considered the question carefully. There's a dragon sanctuary approximately 50 kilometers from here, hidden, well-defended, with medical facilities designed for our physiology. But reaching it would require flight, and my wing is not yet capable of sustained travel. Elena studied the regenerating wing membrane through her scanner. The new growth was impressive, but still thin and fragile. Attempting flight too early could tear the delicate tissue and set back the healing process significantly. Then we wait, Elena decided. 3 more days to ensure complete healing. I have enough medical supplies if we're careful with them. Thren was quiet for a long moment, his great golden eyes studying Elena's face with an intensity that was both flattering and slightly uncomfortable. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a note of wonder. You continue to amaze me, Elena Vasquez. You speak of waiting 3 days as though it were a minor inconvenience rather than a life-altering decision. Do you understand what you are choosing? Elena looked around the collapsed command center, mentally cataloging the challenges ahead. No communication with her superiors, limited food and water, the constant possibility of enemy return, and responsibility for a patient whose physiology she was learning as she went. I'm choosing to see my patient through to full recovery, Elena said simply. Everything else we'll figure out as we go. Thren's laugh was like distant thunder, warm and rich with genuine amusement. Indeed we will, and I suspect the experience will be educational for both our species. Outside, the search aircraft continued their methodical sweep of the battlefield. Elena listened to their engines growing more distant and made peace with her decision. She was committed now to seeing this unprecedented medical case through to its conclusion. She settled back against the debris that had become her makeshift chair and began reviewing her treatment notes. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight she had successfully stabilized the most unusual patient of her medical career. Elena looked over at Thren, who had closed his eyes and entered what appeared to be a healing trance. His breathing had slowed to barely perceptible levels, and his massive body radiated a sense of deep peace and recovery. For the first time since the battle ended, Elena allowed herself to relax. Her patient was stable, her supplies adequate, and her mission clear. Whatever complications arose from her decision to stay, she was confident she had made the right choice. The greatest medical challenge of her career was just beginning. Elena woke on the 3rd morning to find Thren already conscious, his massive form silhouetted against the early light filtering through the damaged ceiling. The dragon had moved during the night, positioning himself near the largest opening in the collapsed structure where he could observe the surrounding terrain. His wing, now fully regenerated, was spread partially open to test its flexibility and strength. The transformation was remarkable. What had been charred bone and destroyed membrane 3 days ago now showed the lustrous black and gold pattern of healthy dragon wing leather. Elena's scanner confirmed what her eyes could see. Thren was fully healed, his vital signs optimal, his energy reserves completely restored. "Good morning," Elena said, packing her medical supplies with the satisfaction of a job well completed. "How does the wing feel?" Thren carefully folded the regenerated wing against his body, testing the range of motion with obvious relief. "Perfect. Better than before the injury. Actually, regenerated tissue is often stronger than the original." He turned his great golden eyes toward Elena. "Your treatments exceeded all expectations. I owe you a debt that cannot easily be repaid." Elena secured her medical kit and checked her remaining supplies. 3 days of careful rationing had stretched her emergency provisions, but she was down to her last nutrient bars and water purification tablets. More concerning was her communication situation. Her attempts to contact coalition forces had all failed, suggesting either equipment failure or active jamming. "Any sign of activity out there?" Elena asked, moving to join Thren near the opening. Thren's enhanced senses had been monitoring their surroundings continuously. Coalition search teams departed yesterday. They completed their sweep of the base and evacuated the last confirmed survivors. "We are now officially alone on this world." Elena processed this information with mixed emotions. Relief that other wounded had been found and treated, concern about her own situation, and a growing realization that her absence from the evacuation would have serious consequences. By now she was listed as missing in action, possibly dead. "What about enemy activity?" she asked. "No hegemony presence detected," Thren reported. "But long-range sensors show unusual energy signatures at the edge of the system. Someone is watching this world, though their intentions remain unclear." Elena joined Thren at the observation point and looked out over the battlefield. 3 days had transformed the scene from fresh devastation to something more settled and permanent. Scavenger birds had found the area, and local vegetation was already beginning to reclaim the disturbed earth. Nature had its own way of healing from war. "I suppose it's time for me to figure out how to get home," Elena said, though the prospect of crossing 50 kilometers of potentially hostile terrain on foot seemed daunting. Thren was quiet for a long moment, his attention focused on something Elena couldn't detect. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of a major decision. "Elena, I must tell you something that may change your perspective on recent events. My presence at this battle was not just a test of hegemony weapons. I was also conducting an evaluation." Elena turned to face the dragon directly. "An evaluation of what?" "Of humanity's fitness for a closer relationship with my species. Dragons do not ally lightly with younger races. We have learned through painful experience that most civilizations are not ready for the knowledge and technology we possess. But humans have shown remarkable potential." Thren shifted position, bringing his massive head closer to Elena's level. "Your actions over the past 3 days have provided the final data point in my evaluation. A human healer who would risk everything to save a wounded dragon, who would improvise treatments for an unknown physiology, who would sacrifice her own safety for the sake of medical ethics. This tells me everything I need to know about your species' character." Elena felt a chill of premonition. "What kind of closer relationship are you talking about?" "Dragons possess medical knowledge accumulated over millions of years. Regeneration techniques, genetic repair methods, treatments for diseases that plague every known species. We have healing technologies that could transform medicine across the galaxy." Thren's golden eyes were intense with possibility. What if that knowledge could be shared with human healers who had proven themselves worthy? The implications hit Elena like a physical blow. She was being offered access to medical advances that could revolutionize treatment for every disease and injury known to humanity. The scientific and humanitarian value was incalculable. But there would be conditions, she said, understanding intuitively that such knowledge couldn't be shared freely. Indeed, dragons do not simply give away the wisdom of ages. Such knowledge must be earned, proven safe in the hands of those who receive it. You would need to come with me to the Dragon Sanctuary to undergo training and evaluation by our master healers. The process could take years. Elena stared out at the alien landscape, trying to process the magnitude of what was being offered. Return to Earth and resume her normal career, or accept an invitation that might transform medicine for her entire species. The choice would affect not just her own future, but potentially the health and longevity of billions of beings across the galaxy. What would happen to my life? My career with the Coalition? My family back on Earth? Thren's expression, as much as Elena could read dragon facial expressions, seemed sympathetic. That would depend on how the knowledge transfer was structured. Dragons have worked with other species in the past, though never as extensively as what I am proposing. Arrangements could be made to honor your existing obligations while pursuing this greater opportunity. Before Elena could respond, Thren's attention snapped to something beyond her perception. His entire body went rigid, and his partially spread wing moved to shield Elena from the observation opening. "We are no longer alone," Thren announced quietly. "Multiple aircraft approaching from the south. Configuration unknown." Elena grabbed her scanner and tried to detect the approaching vehicles, but her equipment lacked the range and sensitivity of Thren's enhanced senses. "Coalition force retourning." "Negative. These are not Coalition designs." Thren's voice carried a grim note. "Elena, we may need to leave this location immediately." Elena quickly gathered her remaining supplies while Thren moved to a better observation position. The approaching aircraft became audible within minutes, a deep, thrumming sound unlike any Coalition vehicle Elena had encountered. "Hegemony?" she asked, though she dreaded the answer. "Unknown faction," Thren replied after a moment of intense concentration. "The energy signatures are familiar, but not immediately identifiable. Possibly mercenaries or scavengers attracted by the battle site." Elena finished packing her gear and moved to join Thren. Through the opening, she could now see 3 dark shapes approaching across the landscape. The vehicles moved with the aggressive speed and formation of military craft rather than peaceful salvagers. "Can you fly?" Elena asked, eyeing Thren's regenerated wing. "Yes, though I would prefer more time to test the new membrane under controlled conditions. More importantly, flight would expose us to detection and possible attack. These vehicles are armed." The approaching craft were close enough now for Elena to see their sleek, predatory designs. They definitely weren't Coalition ships, and their aggressive approach suggested hostile intent. "Options?" Elena asked, checking her sidearm and realizing how inadequate it would be against military-grade aircraft. Thren considered their situation with the calm calculation of a creature who had survived for centuries. "The sanctuary is 50 kilometers north. I can fly that distance, carrying you, but we would be exposed during the journey. Alternatively, we can attempt to hide here and hope they pass by without detecting us." The decision was made for them when energy beams began lancing down from the approaching aircraft, methodically destroying any structure large enough to hide survivors. Elena watched in horror as the remains of the medical bay, where she had first set up her aid station, were vaporized by concentrated plasma fire. "They're not here to scavenge," Elena realized. "They're here to eliminate witnesses." Thren moved with surprising speed for such a massive creature. His powerful foreclaws carved handholds in the debris pile, creating a path to the roof of the collapsed structure. "Elena, climb onto my back. We leave now." Elena didn't hesitate. She scrambled up the improvised path and positioned herself between Thren's powerful shoulder blades, gripping the ridge scales that provided natural handholds. The dragon's hide was warm beneath her, radiating the controlled power of a perfectly evolved predator. "Hold tightly," Thren warned, and launched himself through the opening. The sensation of dragon flight was unlike anything Elena had imagined. Thren's massive wings caught the morning air with a sound like thunder, lifting them rapidly away from the ruined base. Elena felt the incredible power in the dragon's flight muscles, the precise control that allowed such a massive creature to move through the air with grace and speed. Behind them, the attacking aircraft immediately changed course to pursue. Energy weapons lit up the morning sky, forcing Thren into evasive maneuvers that left Elena clinging desperately to his scales. "Who are they?" Elena shouted over the wind. "Hegemony cleanup crew," Thren replied, his voice somehow carrying clearly despite the rushing air. "They've returned to eliminate evidence of their defeat, including any witnesses who might have survived." Elena looked back at their pursuers, counting at least 6 aircraft now visible against the dawn sky. More were emerging from the horizon, forming an aerial net designed to prevent escape. The situation was rapidly becoming hopeless, but Thren had advantages that Elena was only beginning to understand. The dragon's flight pattern seemed random at first, but she gradually realized he was using his knowledge of local air currents and thermal columns to gain speed and altitude while minimizing energy expenditure. His natural camouflage made him difficult to target against the very terrain below. More importantly, Thren was leading their pursuers toward something. Elena noticed they were flying directly toward a line of jagged hills that rose from the planet's surface like broken teeth. The dragon's flight path was taking them into increasingly rough terrain where the larger aircraft would have difficulty maneuvering. "Sanctuary?" Elena called. "Not yet," Thren replied. "First, we lose our escort." Thren dove suddenly toward a narrow canyon cutting through the hills. Elena's stomach lurched as they dropped like a stone toward the rocky walls below. At the last possible second, Thren spread his wings and pulled up, skimming just above the canyon floor at tremendous speed. The pursuing aircraft tried to follow, but their larger size made navigation through the narrow passage nearly impossible. Elena heard the screech of metal against stone as one of the pursuers clipped the canyon wall. Debris rained down behind them as the damaged aircraft struggled to maintain control. Thren led them through a maze of canyons and ravines, using his superior maneuverability to stay ahead of their pursuers while gradually reducing their numbers. Elena watched with a mixture of terror and admiration as the ancient dragon demonstrated flight skills honed over centuries of experience. They emerged from the hill country into more open terrain, but Elena noticed their remaining pursuers had fallen back. The dragon's evasive maneuvers had worked. Only 2 aircraft were still in pursuit, and they seemed less aggressive now, perhaps concerned about following a dragon into unknown territory. "We're almost there," Thren announced, and Elena saw their destination rising from the landscape ahead. The dragon's sanctuary was unlike anything Elena had expected. Rather than the obvious fortress or temple she had imagined, it appeared to be a natural formation of crystalline spires and curved organic shapes that seemed to grow from the earth itself. The entire structure seemed to shift and flow in her peripheral vision, as though it existed partially outside normal space. As they approached, Elena realized the sanctuary was much larger than it had appeared from a distance. The scale was designed for dragons, with openings and landing platforms proportioned for creatures of massive size. But she also noticed smaller structures integrated into the design, suggesting the facility had been built to accommodate multiple species. Thren landed on a broad platform near the sanctuary's main entrance, his claws finding purchase on stone that seemed to have been designed specifically for dragon anatomy. Elena climbed down from his back on unsteady legs, still processing the morning's dramatic events. The pursuing aircraft had stopped at the edge of the sanctuary's airspace, hovering uncertainly as though unwilling to approach closer. Elena watched them through her scanner, noting unusual energy readings emanating from the sanctuary itself. "They won't come closer," Thren explained, noticing her attention to their former pursuers. "This place is protected by technologies that make most species uncomfortable. Humans seem to be among the few who can tolerate the effects." Elena turned her attention to the sanctuary itself, marveling at the impossible architecture. The structures seemed to be carved from single pieces of crystal, but the internal spaces were clearly much larger than the external dimensions should have allowed. "Space folding technology," Thren explained, seeing her confusion. "One of the first things you would learn here if you chose to accept my earlier offer. Elena looked back at the pursuing aircraft, then at the incredible sanctuary, then at Thren himself. 3 days ago, she had been a simple combat medic treating routine battlefield injuries. Now she stood at the threshold of secrets that could transform medicine for every species in the galaxy. If I go in there, Elena said slowly, my old life is over, isn't it? Thren's golden eyes were sympathetic but honest. Your old life was over the moment you chose to stay and treat my injuries. What happens now is simply a matter of choosing what kind of new life you want to build. Elena took a deep breath and looked around at the impossible beauty of the dragon sanctuary. In the distance, the pursuing aircraft were finally retreating, apparently unwilling to challenge whatever defenses protected this place. She was safe here for the moment, but safety wasn't really the issue anymore. The issue was opportunity. The chance to learn medical techniques that had been perfected over millions of years. The possibility of bringing that knowledge back to humanity, of revolutionizing treatment for diseases and injuries that had plagued her species since the beginning of recorded history. Elena thought about her oath as a physician, her commitment to preserving life and reducing suffering wherever possible. She thought about all the patients she had been unable to save, all the conditions that remained untreatable with current medical technology. How long would the training take, she asked. That would depend on your aptitude and dedication, Thren replied. Dragon medicine is as much art as science, as much philosophy as technique. Some concepts might take years to master. Others you already understand better than many of our own healers. Elena nodded slowly, her decision crystallizing. She had come here to treat a wounded dragon, but she was leaving as something different, a pioneer at the intersection of human and dragon medical knowledge. I accept your offer, Elena said formally. I want to learn everything you can teach me. Thren's massive head moved in what Elena had learned to recognize as a dragon smile. Then, welcome to the Dragon's Sanctuary, Elena Vasquez. Your real education in the healing arts is about to begin. As they walked toward the sanctuary's entrance, Elena felt the weight of her decision settling around her like a new identity. She was no longer just a human combat medic. She was something unprecedented, the first human to be accepted for training in the ancient medical arts of the dragons. Behind them, the last of the pursuing aircraft disappeared over the horizon, carrying word of their failure back to whoever had sent them. But Elena barely noticed. Her attention was focused forward toward mysteries and knowledge that would reshape her understanding of medicine itself. The wounded dragon had been saved, but in saving him, Elena had discovered something far more valuable than a successful medical intervention. She had found her true calling as a healer, and a path toward advances that could benefit every living being in the galaxy. Thren led her through the sanctuary's entrance into spaces that seemed to exist outside the normal rules of physics. Elena's new life as a student of dragon medicine was beginning, and she could hardly wait to see where it would lead. The greatest medical adventure in human history was just beginning.